everyone, welcome to the Sharkmob London podcast, a community of game developers and enthusiasts talking about the one thing they enjoy the most, games. My name is Nichola Humphreys, you can refer to me as she, her, and I'll be your host for today. And today we are joined by Joshua. Joshua, how about you introduce yourself?
Hi guys, my name is Joshua Mallet. I'm a level designer and I'm super happy to be here. It's really cool to get invited. Thank you, Nichola, for inviting me.
Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. And as a fellow shark mobster, it's always good to bring people from Sharkmob onto the podcast. So before we get into the topic conversation, I just throw an icebreaker question your way, just so that the audience can get to know you a little bit more, and so it's more of a chill vibe, you know.
Okay.
So my question to you is, if you had to be part of any video game universe, which would it be and why?
Oh no! No. See, a lot of the games I like are like dystopian styled games and really miserable. So I can't recommend those ones. Probably like the world of Skyrim. If you dropped me in that, any kind of the Elder Scrolls worlds, that would be awesome. Or something like Mass Effect.
Ooh.
So pre Reapers invading, destroying the universe, like just by Mass Effect. Yeah, I'd like to be them before we all get wiped out by giant squid robots. Yeah, Mass Effect. I just really like the kind of space travel, going around different planets, different creatures and aliens you can meet and stuff. So it's a really cool game. So yeah.
No, that sounds like a great choice. And
what about you?
So if I had to be part of any video game universe, it would be less exciting than Mass Effect and being in space and stuff. I think I would choose to get the small idle world of Slime Ranch. And just going around and like the Slime Rancher games.
Oh, okay.
Going around and just having that soundtrack in my ear 24/7.
Seeing all these little slimes.
Oh, that is true. Actually, I would eventually go insane.
Oh, amazing! Cool. Yeah. So yeah, for me, Mass Effect, space travel, going to different worlds. Yeah. I think that'd be pretty cool, as opposed to getting eaten alive by some kind of creature in another game.
No, I think it's always good if I spend every day not worrying about getting eaten by giant space creatures.
Oh, cool.
So moving on to the topic of conversation of the L podcast. So our topic conversation today is, what is level design? Because Josh, yourself, you are a level designer in the games industry. So on nuclino.com, level design is the phase of game development process that deals with creating the stages, maps, and missions of the game. So I'm curious, what is your definition of level design?
So when I explain this to people who aren't in games, I try to liken us more to architects. And it really depends on the platform and the type of game you're making, because for liking us an architect would be more suitable to 3D games, so things like Gears of War or Assassin's Creed or Mass Effect, for example, when you're building an environment and you're making all the challenges and basically taking all the different pieces of what the other members of the team have done and placing them into an environment where the player spends most of their time. That's what they're going to be engaging with. So essentially all the content the player will engage with. And when you want to explain that for something like Mario, where they place the platforms, where enemies will move, all of that sort of things, that's basically what a level designer does. Taking the narrative experience for the player. So yeah, that's my long-winded way of saying what a level design is. Oh, I can't hear you. Your volume has dropped. Hello.
Oh, sorry, that was my fault. I didn't click my microphone on. But I was I was just saying that I asked that question and you cut out for a second, so we could just go over that really quick.
Oh, did I cut out? Oh man, disaster.
It's all right. It's all right.
Do you want to ask it again? And
Yeah, sure. So I can always send a note to the editor saying like, oh, this bit cut out. It's all good. Don't worry.
okay, cool.
So I'll ask that again real quick. So yeah. So yeah, our topic of conversation today is what is a level designer? And according to Nichola.com, level design is the phase of game development process that deals with creating stages and maps and missions of the game. So I'm curious, Josh, what is your definition of level design?
So I would actually say that's a pretty accurate description. When I have to explain what a level designer is to someone not in games, I liken us to architects. And the reason for that is because we take all the pieces that other members of the studio, so art and programming and lighting, taking all of those different aspects and gameplay and putting them into a container, which is what we call a level. And it depends on the type of level you're making. So if you're making a first-person shooter, it will basically be placing the blocks in. But sometimes, depending on the studio, that can range between placing the blocks, making the assets, and everything to do with the level, or just white boxing or rough boxing, and communicating with art to place that into the game. But in essence, it's all the content that the player will engage with. That's what a level designer basically handles. So the mission, and where enemies are placed, when they're triggered, when certain cutscenes might show up, that sort of thing. Yeah, so there's it varies depending on company, but yeah, that's what I've pretty much done in my experience.
Nice. So you've had a bit of experience in the games industry. So I'm curious, from your professional opinion, what do you say makes a good level design? Like, are there any examples of good level design?
Okay, so all right, good examples of level design. I think multiplayer level design, Halo's earlier maps, particularly Halo 2, we had things like Blood Gulch, Coagulation. I think levels that fit an archetype very well, and allow players to get a specific type of gameplay experience, depending on the game types they're trying to play. So if it's capture the flag, you want players where they can have multiple options of getting into an area or getting out of an area. You want them to be able to use different weapons, different pickups, and it's very high level, but also vehicles being able to get into the area as well. So in essence, I think a good level is one that takes all of the content that we've created, allows the player to have that kind of sandbox and experiment and find out new ways to engage with that content themselves. And you're basically giving them a playground for them to go and have fun in and experience and try things in different ways. So levels that teach, levels that allow the player to experiment, those are what I think would make really good levels.
Nice. So more than just like going from A to B, it's like giving that player the additional level of like exploration.
Yeah, depending on, especially if you're like making an open world game, then yeah, exactly. That's very important.
Nice.
And
oh, no, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so like going on to that then, like an example of bad level design, I was going to say is levels where it's easy to get lost, it's not clear, so navigation is a big part, and forcing players to figure things out on their own without giving them the tools to do so is an example of like bad level design. And there are various types of games like where it's okay to give them that puzzle, but you ensure that they have the tools or they've got a clear way of finding out the tools. We try to avoid levels from being very corridory. We want them to feel like they're in an open space unless that's the intent. So it's always about intent and making sure that things are developed with clear intent. If they're not, then and you've gone in without thinking about what you're doing, then you can't expect the player to really pick up and understand, or they just might engage with your content in a way that you don't particularly want them to. So, yeah.
No, yeah, that makes total sense. And like there have been instances where I played games before and I've jumped into level and I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing because like the layout is all funky.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
But as a level designer, I'm curious. because you mentioned art before and asset creation. What disciplines do level designers work closely with within the games industry?
So I think we have to work with all disciplines really, particularly like gameplay, programming, arts, environment arts. We have to make sure that when we're building our levels, we're communicating exactly the intent. So the narrative intent, we work with the narrative team. So they'll give us an idea or give us a narrative they want us to run through, and from that we'll take the information and turn that into gameplay and turn it into a level. And then we'll work with art to make sure that the theme of wherever you've been told you are, it translates through blocks. So, for example, when I was working at DICE, we made sure that we communicated with art daily to ensure that they were kind of engaged in what we were doing. But when I worked at King, they gave us the assets basically, and we just were able to run wild and build a level running around that. It's only when we did actual like blocker or item creation where we needed to communicate, this is how many stages it has, this is how it works, this is how we can communicate to the player, that it's changed its state. Especially in casual games, it's very different. So you also have a producer that you need to be communicating with as well. So there's lots of different disciplines that pop in, and because all of the content gets put into one place, which is a level, you need to be able to talk to everyone. I think I would work, depending on the stages. Early stages, it's very closely with art in AAA games, 3D games, and then later on, you're communicating with QA to make sure that they're testing a level, that you're also testing a level, and you can basically find issues and fix those before they go out to the players. And then after content's been released, post-launch, making sure that you're on top of that and maintaining the levels too. So yeah, we basically have to talk to everyone. Yeah, everyone in the game team most of the time, yeah, we'll be talking to them.
Nice. And yeah, I guess like with most game dev roles within the industry, it's all about like communication as well. So just making sure you have like a good friendship with everyone as well, because then you can really be like, hey, what about this, and what about X, Y, and Z, and that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Making sure that you can actually get on and communicate with people is really important as a designer, because you have to be very clear with your ideas and what you're saying, and put it in a way that anyone can really understand, but also have the kind of understanding of what the other team needs and wants from you. So, for example, asset creation, and metrics, how tall or how wide does an object need to be, and when you're placing it down, how can you encourage an artist to see what your intent is with that, without having to name and just tell them explicitly, this is what I want it to be. So yeah, and that freedom.
Nice. And you mentioned that you've worked at companies such as King, but you've also worked on games such as Battlefield 2042. So I'm curious, what are the differences between working in a 2D space compared to a 3D space when it comes to level design?
So I started my career at Lionhead working on Fable Legends, and when I started building in that type of game, it really was, again, communicating with a lot of different team members. But you also had to make sure the game worked from two viewpoints as well. So I had to build like an RTS style for one side. It was an asymmetric multiplayer game, co-op multiplayer game. And one side played the villain, who was an RTS player, and the other side I played action-based camera, third-person camera heroes. And making sure that the level worked for both sides, that's where the challenge came in there. You have to make sure that it's not just nice from one view, that it can work from all views. You have to make sure there's loads of different paths and routes. But when I worked on a match 3 game, it's totally different, but a lot of that stuff still translates. So the similarities, I actually gave a talk about how Gears of War influenced my level design for Candy Crush Friends. So I mentioned archetypes, the type of level you're trying to get in the game is actually really important, and so players can understand what they're trying to do. But you really have to make sure that when you're making a 3D level, depending on how photorealistic it is, you have to be aware of like your asset count, the polygon count. You have to be aware of pathing and routes. And in the match 3 game, you have to be aware of the type of moves you have. But things have to be very clear, and that's quite a casual game to a hardcore game. In difference from a hardcore game, making sure that anyone can really pick it up and play it. There are certain biases that you might have on a controller or a console player that you won't have for a mobile casual player. So people can really just pick up your game, look at it, and pull it down straight away. And because it's free, they haven't lost anything. They might be less invested. So ensuring that players can replay that and get a lot of content out of that is really important. But the whole idea of choice, making sure that players have choice through the amount of moves or through creating different routes or different options when they first load up the level, and giving them that clarity is really important in a game like Candy Crush and a game like Farm Heroes. Whereas I think that in 3D games, there can be a bit more discovery that they can as they move through the level. So it's about giving them those tools to kind of find out and cut their own path. So yeah, that's my waffling way. But yeah, it really depends. It really depends on the game, I would say. But yeah, so all of the companies are working at DICE, from working with Criterion on Need for Speed. That's a racing game versus a shooting game. That's very different. But in the same sense, it's almost like taking a player through the world very quickly in a racing game, but you are pretty much encouraged to stay on the track. Whereas a game like Battlefield 2042, when we developed the levels on there, it was about helping the players get to point A as fast as possible, but trying to give them different options that they could move along. But it was really like beelining straight to the objective. Whereas in a game like Fable, it was about more convoluted paths and having the player kind of have seen where they need to get to, but changing direction and giving them that extended sense of gameplay, so they can kind of feel like they're figuring out how they need to get to the landmark. And yeah, that's an important part.
Nice. And yeah, it's very interesting how you bring up racing games as well, because a lot of them with racing games, there's usually set tracks in the world and set tracks in like racing car tracks as well. So there's always that extra level of like incorporating those into the level.
Yeah, exactly. When we were developing levels on Need for Speed Unbound, the world, when I came on, the world was pretty much built up, but it was about finding where in those tracks that had been intended for gameplay, where we could find racing gameplay, and where we could actually find that those opportunities for players to try different things or to jump into a race and have that experience and get a different experience. So you might have a very technical race which has a lot of switchbacks, basically loops, loops back on themselves downhill or uphill. And then you might have one race which is very just on a highway. You've got all this traffic coming at you, and it's really about switch reactions. And if you get hit, it's very difficult to catch up unless you're playing in front of you, make some mistakes. So you might have more traffic that appears to kind of equal it out. So lots of interesting secrets and stuff about racing games that I just was completely oblivious to before I joined the studio. So yeah, really, really excited. I now look at Mario Kart with different eyes, for a different lens.
To be fair, the Mario Kart track with the trucks that go left to right, it always triggers me whenever I play it.
Yeah.
So I can't do it. I'd rather play Rainbow Road.
Rainbow Road, risky. I always fall off on that. I remember that on the Wii. The nightmares. I can remember. So yeah. That's
just like, I feel like that's level design, but with a challenge. It's like we're just letting the players loose. Good luck.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's just, yeah. I think, and that's it. I would say, for games like Candy Crush and Farm Heroes, Super Saga, and Battlefield, it's a multiplayer game. These levels have to be very replayable. But what we found, at least at King, is that we didn't really create the game for players to go back. So even if there was a level they really enjoyed, they would progress, and it's all about progressing. In Battlefield, there's this thing about meta build-up, players forming new strategies, and as you update the levels, we recently did that with one of my levels, which is called Renewal, where we did a complete rework. We cut away parts of the map, streamlined it for players, and because we found that that's the areas where players engaged the most, and also just helped with navigation through the level. you'll change one thing and the player will form a whole different strategy on it. So keeping on top of things is really important. And the same could be said for match-3 games. You take away a move, you increase the health of one item, and suddenly the level becomes much easier or much harder depending on what you've done. So it's really about understanding the why behind why you've done things, and that's something that translates between both environments of 3D and 2D, I think.
No, that makes total sense, and it's like opening the horizons to more than just putting Lego bricks on top of each other to say, like, this is the level. It's taking so many more factors into consideration.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, when my wife peeked over my shoulder just to see what I was doing, she was like, "Oh, that's like Lego," and she's an architect herself, so she knows all of the stuff there. But it is like a lot more complicated, I guess, than just stacking. Yeah, like you said, stacking blocks on. It's if you stack that block, suddenly you can see over a wall that you couldn't before. So it's about all of these different connecting parts, making sure that they make sense. It's a lot of work. I'm finding that out now on this project. So it's a lot of work.
But yeah, you mentioned before that you took inspiration from Gears of War when making Candy Crush. So I'm curious, are there any? What are your main inspirations for designing levels, and are there any unique ones that people might not think were good inspirations?
Do you mean what's like unique like ideas or inspirations that have come from other games?
Yeah, so
or do you mean level types?
Yeah, so like what things in the world inspire you to design levels? So other games, real life architecture, potentially movie sets?
Oh, so I used to do theatre studies as a child, and going up towards university A levels, I did like drama and acting, and we were asked to watch like films and plays, and a lot of those things were like things like Macbeth, Othello, and just the way they created mood with lighting, with music and all the sound. So that's like from an ambient side of point of view. And from the stage itself, it was always about having these the characters on a high ground or lower ground, and that's something that you see even in things like Star Wars. I remember there was the Battle of Mustafar when Obi-Wan and Anakin are fighting, and they're jumping on these platforms, so everything along them is collapsing, and they're kind of helping each other whilst also attacking each other. And so there was always this kind of idea of like levels that change. So when I started developing levels for Candy Crush Friends in particular. Oh, actually, if we go back to Fable, there was a level in that game where the level would change and you'd have to go backwards. And that idea of having to use the same content but come from another direction was really interesting for me. And that's what I saw that in movies like, I think The Mummy, did it first, where everything changes and suddenly everything starts collapsing and one of the characters has to run through. And other games like Metroid 2, Metroid Prime 2 Echoes, where you teleport to a new world and it'd be the same level but kind of corrupted, and certain things that were there are now different. So when I translated that into Fable, it came from the idea of like, okay, how can I get a different experience from the same geometry? How can I change some paths and lead the player down a different route that it wasn't accessible before? So yeah, I also, during quite early in my career, I also became quite infatuated with like the reclamation of nature and how you'd have this like post-apocalyptic world and how like plants would overgrow certain areas. So that, I just kind of thinking forward, it's added quite a lot. But now I'm very, very involved in Warhammer, particularly the Horus Heresy, and painting miniatures, and I do that part-time as well with some friends. And one of the things I've learned from just painting a miniature is really breaking things down, because you'll have these really complicated shapes and all these miniatures with all this like fur or tentacles or like claws coming out, and so a super soldier in powered armor with really like robust shapes, and that's the key part. Breaking things down into shapes helps you understand how you actually need to paint that object, and how the light travels. And that's something I took into my level design, because if sometimes I start with the big picture of like, okay, what's the overall thing I'm trying to achieve? But then breaking things down into smaller sections just helps myself. What I do in my experience helps me know, okay, what do I need to do next? First, I need to do this section, understand and be really intentful about that, and then I can add on and make sure that the other parts work. But first, I need to get this bit done first. And in some circumstances, I haven't had the time to do that. It's been like, you seem to go really quick. But with, I guess, we would call that in Warhammer batch painting. You spray a model really quickly, and then you get all the colors on, and then you just smoke some more colors on. And that links on to sort of how I've done that in Candy Crush as well. So I would take a level, I would break it down into its components, and then I would do all of those sections and components first, and then move on to the next one. And that's helped me to like develop a lot of levels. So there's a time where I had to make 40 levels in 2 weeks, which was the most content anyone was making at the studio at the time, and just to stay on top of our cadence. So yeah, there were always ways I formed to help with that. But also, not so much. This is actually a technique that I think every level designer or anyone working could study with all the kind of distractions going on. I do something called the Pomodoro technique, which in Italian means tomato. I don't know why it befits Pomodoro, but anyway, basically what it is that you would work for 20 minutes completely focused, and then you'd have a 5-minute break after those 20 minutes are done. And that lets you get work done faster, and that's what allowed me to stay on top of my requirements when I was working. So yeah, really helpful way of working. I found just helps me time and time again. Well, that's a tangent there. I don't know if that's what you asked for.
No, that's a great tangent, and that's always like a good topic to bring up, to be like, don't forget to take care of yourself when you're designing games.
No, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's
I would
interesting.
Definitely say. Oh, sorry, Nicole.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, art for 100%. I've gotten more interested in art, and that has helped, particularly with composition, knowing how I want to guide a player through the level. Just in movies, and how they have a character walk out of like this cave or something, and then they'll be shown a whole world. And that's something we've seen. I think Breath of the Wild started doing that more, and then we saw other games start doing that more and more. Just like kind of vista shot and showing players where they need to go, or all these little content pieces that they could interact with in the distance. That's something that movies has been doing for a very long time, and games have picked up. And yeah. Now we see things like Last of Us, games like Last of Us becoming films, and they fit and transfer completely perfectly, where other films haven't had the same luck. Other games haven't been translated into films.
I feel like this is throwing shade at Halo by any chance.
Oh no! Don't even start. I refuse to. I watched one scene and I refuse to. Anyway, I'm not even going to go.
I mean, they make Master Chief speak now. It's crazy.
Showing his face. I was convinced he's just a head. He's just like a little head inside a big helmet. And now they've shown what he looks like. I was like, no, that's not.
It's like a Full Metal Alchemist, so you just take the head off and there's nothing in there. But
yeah,
it's like,
it's
exactly.
Like just an armor, just a suit of empty armor. That's what I mean. That's what anime. Now you've opened the floodgates now.
I am all for talking about anime.
But yeah, anime 100%. A lot of the time when I'm trying to develop a painting or a level, I'm listening to a certain type of music. Mm-hmm. Especially if I'm going to have a boss battle, I will play music of like Dark Souls or music from Full Metal Alchemist or Attack on Titan, Fate, for all of those different animes that have influenced me, all the different characters. And it's actually helped when I did a little bit of character design and combat design, looking at how specifically in things like Final Fantasy or what animes are, Dragon Ball Z. Now you're going all the way now. Just the different characters and different, in Naruto, all the different kind of ways these characters interact and the weapons they have and the powers they use, how that can translate into a game. There's so much inspiration to take there. Yeah, really means a lot. So it's cool.
I mean, speaking of like Dragon Ball, if you take Goku into consideration with this instant transmission, I just feel like that just throws every sort of like idea out the window. It's like, oh, that ledge over there, I'm just going to teleport over there really quick.
Yeah. There's a game that actually did that really. I've been playing Returnal actually,
Nice.
which is this very clearly inspired by films like Aliens, Prometheus. What other things have they got? They've got loads of like creepy, like even Metroid. There's like lots of like kind of it's a roguelike game. But what's interesting for me is that the levels completely change when you go in, but they're very noticeable changes. They're not just like maybe a block higher here or here. No, it's like completely like different experience. So like, oh, I'm gonna go back to where I just died. Oh no, I can't. It's changed. So how do I get there now? So it's that has been really interesting. But they have this feature where you can fall like into a low area.
Okay.
Maybe you'll fight an enemy there, or you'll come across like some new pickups or new items, but they'll have this thing that lets you teleport right back. And throughout the world, you can find these items that let you interact with the world differently. So like being able to jump and smash the floor when you land, or high resistance to enemy attacks, or healing, or be able to teleport, all these different things. So I think depending on when the game is set, how grounded the game is, that's where you can really be imaginative. I find levels or games where I have to be quite grounded to be a bit more difficult, because you have to have more realistic and grounded ways of getting a player through a level. You can't just have some thinking, like for example, Uncharted. You can't expect Drake to just teleport at some point. It's not realistic. Whereas a game like Returnal or Mass Effect, maybe you could, because it's in the universe. So yeah, it's definitely interesting types of level design you can get from less grounded games.
No, yeah, I totally agree with that, and I almost feel that when you're trying to do overall design for more grounded games such as The Last of Us or Uncharted, it's almost more of a challenge because you have to be confined to the realms of reality. Whereas in more fantasy games, it's like, oh, we'll just give the player a jetpack because it works in this world.
Because it works, right?
Because games, you know.
No, exactly. But I think games like Uncharted and The Last of Us in particular, as a level designer, the content you're making the player interact with, if you know the player has less options in terms of like teleporting or movement, it really is helpful for the type of game you're making, particularly if you want it to be very tense. You want those engagements with those infected, what they called, like not
clickers?
Mustard men. Yeah, clickers. What they called mustard men. The fungus characters.
Oh, there's clickers and there's runners, I believe, the ones that are just like super quick but can see.
Oh gosh, I haven't gotten that far. It came out. I started playing it when COVID hit. Unfortunately, I was just like, yes, this is too depressing to play during a pandemic. Let me avoid it. But you want them
let me avoid a pandemic by playing a pandemic.
But I mean, a game like that, or even a game like Amnesia, where they totally take away your combat. There's no combat system in Amnesia. Terrible, terrifying, horrible horror game that. Oh, I've still got nightmares thinking about it. But for example, you want the players to feel like scared. You want them to feel like if that thing reaches me, it's the end. So I think, like, if I work on another game in the future, I'd really like to try a realistic one just to have that experience, because I've worked on so many different types of fantasy games already. Battlefield is a bit more grounded, a bit more simmy, but still got quite a bit of arcade aspects. So yeah.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. And I feel like Battlefield is almost a mixture of, it's mainly grounded, but it has that small percentage of being like, yeah, I mean, like if you want to climb to the top of a tower and do a backflip into a helicopter, I suppose we'll let you do it.
Exactly. Jump off the. I remember when that trailer came out. We released the trailer, and that was a complete homage to some of our fans. And like, yeah, not realistic at all. You're not going to jump out, but that's the sort of thing you can do in the game. So it makes sense for the context it's in. But yeah, so cool.
So yeah, you've made quite a few games yourself in the games industry, and like you've got quite a solid portfolio when it comes to games. So I'm curious, what was your path in becoming a level designer specifically?
So when I was younger, I played my first game I played was Sonic the Hedgehog on the Sega Mega Drive. I think it's Sonic the Hedgehog 2,
Snap.
actually. I don't think
That's a great one.
Yeah. Oh, boy. Sonic the Hedgehog. So cool. Lost hours on that game. I can never win, though. Always lost. But I remember becoming, like, really interested in, like, games in general. Played things like Streets of Rage, all those classic games, right up until college. And I think when I was about 16, 17, I was looking at things to do. And I remember Time Splitters 2, and I'm not sure if Halo 3 had come out at that point, but Time Splitters 3. Time Splitters 3 had a editing software on the Xbox. Like, you could make your own, like, very corridory, blocky maps. You could go in and do some scripting and set up encounters. So I made my own, like, maps in that game. And I was like, oh, this is cool. And then StarCraft as well, I started playing around. So I basically just came from playing games that I really enjoyed and seeing if they had, like, some kind of editor or kit editor. StarCraft had maps editors, and I was, like, not very good at making strategy maps. I wasn't even good at StarCraft at the time. I always lose. So I just made, like, assault maps from Starship Troopers. Starship Troopers, actually, going back to your previous question about filmmaking, massive influence for me into, like, games, aliens, monsters, all of that sort of thing. And I remember watching Halo 2, because by this point I was a huge Halo fan. And they had a documentary of, like, the making of Halo 2, and there was a person there just making a map out of blocks. I was just like, what is that? What? We can make games? We can. So I don't think I actually really, like, when I was younger, I was always told that if you wanted to be in games, you had to own a company and you could get people to make it for you, but no one really ever explained what that was. So seeing it in Halo was, like, one of the first times. And then also, like, Foley in Republic Commando style, Republic Commando, banging game. Please remake it. Those sorts of things. And then I just basically, I found in school there was no subject for games. Everything was very, like, general programming. There was Python. I remember I was Visual Studio, C#. Was it C# or C++? I can't remember what it was. Oh, Visual Basic. It was Visual Basic. So it was another language. And I just remember, like, not really having any avenue, but I would always be building things like Lego in my spare time, Warhammer in my spare time, building environments and doing little maps. And then at university, Microsoft Recruiter had come in to Microsoft talking about internships, and by this time I had already been making maps in games like Dawn of War, Gears, Halo, Halo Forge, and so I had a portfolio that I could show her and speak to her about. And that landed me a job at Lionhead Studios, working on Fable Legends, which unfortunately got cancelled. But that was my first real example of, like, this is how game development really works. At my university, we didn't really have anyone that knew much about the games industry, and that was, like, I think it's a lot better now, but back then there really wasn't anyone you could really talk to unless you were brave enough to message someone and networking. And for me, networking was a really big part of the success of my career. Really getting to know people and going out of my way to build those relationships has helped me, has been invaluable. And I think that kind of sets you apart from someone who, well, it's such a competitive community in the games industry. Once you're in, but getting is really difficult to find someone. But normally, if people like you, that's always a good start. If you can get on well with people, that's always a good start, and people will be willing to give you a chance. So for me, because I got on very well with the recruiter, she could see the passion I had. And the day of my interview, I actually missed it. It had gone to my junk folder, and I didn't really check my junk folder, so I missed the interview. And she called me up. I was in Sainsbury's at the time, and she called me up and said, "You missed your interview. Why did you miss your interview?" I was like, "Wait, what interview?" And I had noticed that I wasn't. She said, "You have an interview sometime this week." I hadn't got a notification, so I had sent a message to say I'm still really keen. I haven't heard anything. So she said, "Okay, fine. We'll give you one more chance. You need to be there tomorrow." So was there, got the interview, got the job 20 minutes after leaving the studio. They called me and said, "Yeah, we want him." So that was great. And that basically helped me, that set me up for the rest of my career. Lionhead closed, and I went to a BAFTA event just to see if I could see if there's more people I can meet or talk to. And met someone from King. and she basically recommended me, and I went through that process. I had all this big portfolio that I had been working on, and I think, especially when you're more junior, having a portfolio is really important, just so you stand out and work that isn't just university work as well. This is something I'm really passionate about, and speaking to people and students at schools, it's like you need a portfolio that's more than just university work. You need to be showing that you've been working outside of that university time, and that it's a general passion for you. You're not just playing games, you're analyzing them, you're making them. We've got loads of tools, things like Unity, Unreal, things that weren't as accessible when I was growing up. We've got loads of it, so I feel like we've got very little excuse these days, depending on your background, to not at least try to make something in your spare time to do with games. And my mentor at Microsoft ended up being, he went to EA, and when was ready to leave King, after working there for 4 years, he basically said, "Do you want to come work on the next Need for Speed?" And so that was my avenue into EA. So jumping from 3D into mobile back to 3D, it was just because of relationships, really, building a portfolio, but I think forming those friendships with people really helped. So it's sad but true. Sometimes it's about who you know, but then it also becomes about what you do. But I think the earlier part is who you know, but showing that what you can do is really important too. So yeah, and then EA finished Need for Speed, which was very different to Battlefield, which is very different to Need for Speed, which has been different to where we are at Sharkmob. So yeah, now I'm here back in London, and it feels good really to be back. No longer, no more 2-hour train journeys into Guildford. So yeah, it's been really cool. It's been really fun. So I've been in the industry for about 6 years now, maybe coming up to 7. I'm not sure. 6 years, and I've just learned really to be patient. Really be patient with yourself and learning. It's all a process. There's no rush. You'll see some people who will progress really quickly through their careers, and some people who take longer. But it's all, at the end of the day, it's your own journey, and that's been really helpful for me in my career. Understanding that everyone takes different times for people to progress and move forward. It's really important. Don't know how I got there, but yeah, that's just a big learning for me.
No, it's a great little tangent that we went on, and I feel like that's wonderful advice for people who are thinking about getting into level design, who haven't jumped into the games industry yet. Because that was going to be one of my questions, but you beat me to it, so I'm all for that. But you mentioned getting portfolios and like doing some networking. So for individuals who are also still getting into level design and wanting to get into the games industry, are there any like talks, panels, documents, or books that you recommend people reading? Or
there's lots of. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, if you want to eat some books, there's some great ones out there. Architecture. There's Jesse Shell's. I think it's called. I forgot what it's called now. It's like I'll see if I can find it. It's a level design architecture book. But there's that. There's State of Play. That's another a really good book. There's a guy called Max Pears, who's a friend I met at what's it called? Oh, it's gone out of my head now. At the BAFTA event, that's it. So Max Pears, he made a podcast called Level Up. That's really good. There's plenty of GDC talks, particularly the one from the guys who made God of War. Really important, God of War, and they spoke about God of War Ragnarok and the difference in level design and breaking that up. So that's been really helpful. Websites. I'm trying to see if there's any. World of Level Design is a good website you can refer to, especially they have a book that they sell as well, that you can purchase and just go through all the other ideas. But there was also a document that was made by a group of level designers, and it's totally for free. You can download it if you just PDF search it on Google, and it's called Level Design. Yeah, it's called the Level Design Pursuit of Better Levels in Level Design. So that's really helpful as well. So I use that specifically when I was going back into 3D level design just to get a better understanding. of the sort of things that are required when you're developing a 3D level. So not very useful. I haven't given you any like accurate names. I feel really bad. I'll see if I can do some up, and you can add them in after the talk.
No,
Yeah.
to be fair, I'm always forgetting name books, and even though I have like a bookshelf filled with books, I'm like,
That's really bad.
who wrote this?
I don't remember. I'll see if I can find it.
But no, yeah, those are great things to recommend, and like then easily accessible as well. So I always find that like recommending things that are free or quite easy to get are great sort of advantages when getting into the industry. Because I remember when I was a student, I was like, oh, going to these events are cool, but they cost money, and it's either go to an event or eat.
Yeah,
So...
yeah, no, 100%. I think living in London has made it quite lucky. But I think a lot of us are sharing. So yeah, Santa Monica with God of War, really helpful. Naughty Dog's talks on The Last of Us. I'm sure this must be talked by Epic, talking about Gears as well. And depends on the type of game. But the easiest thing really is, and I know this sounds daunting, is just a message. So I set up a talk with when I was at King, between Blizzard and King, talking about level design. I got 3 Blizzard developers, game designers, to come in and talk to all of the level design during COVID, just to speak to us about how they developed games on Overwatch, levels on Overwatch. And I know it sounds really odd, but just saying, hey, I'd love to just sit with you or ask you some questions, or if you've got any advice, just reaching out to people. A lot of people have reached out to me and I've responded, and I think the majority of people are more than happy to just answer a couple of questions, because let's be honest, people like talking about themselves. So it's asking questions about like how you can get in. But yeah, just I think it's hard for people, because I think as game gamers, we are kind of seen more kind of reclusive. I don't think so anymore, but in the past, definitely. But I think now it's like you need to kind of stand out in a world where everything's on TikTok, everything's on Instagram, things are just blaring for all our attention. You need to kind of find ways to stand out. And sometimes it's just joining a game jam. That's been really helpful. Joining the game jams and getting involved in what other people are doing, and just building your portfolio. Yeah, there's lots of things. I can definitely send some links afterwards to help you out, and things that I think would be useful and helpful.
Nice. Yeah, and like almost every person that has come on this podcast or I've talked to in general, they've always said that the number one thing that you can do for getting into the industry and just like practicing skills within game development is joining game jams. And even like while I'm in the industry, every time I see like the GMTK game jam come up or Ludendari, I'm like, well, I think I have a free weekend, so go on then.
Yeah, absolutely. Jump in. I think there's one thing I would definitely like to do more of, and that's making like my own mini games. It's something I always used to feel like, oh, I can't program and I don't enjoy programming. I've really tried, but my brain's just like, no, not working. So it's hard. It's really hard, but I think if you can find someone who does enjoy that and partner with them, that's really, really helpful. And even if you're making your own level, partnering with an artist, someone that like enjoys that side and saying, I'd love to develop a level. I helped someone get into Creative Assembly doing that. We made a level in Dawn of War 3's so Relics level editor, and he went on to get a job in Creative Assembly. So it's helpful. It's really helpful, just like finding someone to help you out.
Yeah, and I feel like when showcasing something like level design or art, for example, it's even just making like a walking simulator to be like, oh, you can walk around this level just to see what the architecture is like. It doesn't have to be like a full-on like bullet hell or a Pac-Man copy. It's just like just walk through this level.
No, because I think when you're later in your career, all of that stuff you'll learn. So I don't think, I mean, I could have tried to make a game when I was more junior by myself, but I definitely would have struggled. And the experience and learnings I've got from places like King and EA and now Sharkmob, I've learned a lot more than I would have if I started just from the start of it. And that's why I really got into I wanted to join a studio so I could learn as much as I can, find out ways to do things, and then take that somewhere else. And that's basically what I've been doing. That's why I've really jumped to different styles of games.
Mhm.
I've worked on racing games, first-person shooters, match-3 games, um, adventure games, so loads of different things, all of that to kind of broaden my horizon so I can take that and do lecturing in the future. So that's my kind of next goal. Ever since I got into the industry, is about lecturing and helping young people get into games and teaching them really, because there's at the time when I was going through it, there wasn't really anyone. That's not true. I've had one or two people each time that I've really become close with, and I've had like mentor me and guide me at every company I've worked at. But at university, that wasn't really there because no one had worked in games at the time, and the one person who did work in games left pretty quickly. So
Oh.
because he had to go back to, because he was full time lecturer. He found that things were just moving too fast, and he wanted to get back into games anyway. So it's definitely something I'd like to do part time. But yeah, valuable, really valuable.
And yeah, so we've mentioned all of these like different resources that people can go into when it comes to getting into level design. So what would you say are like the core foundational skills that you need to become a level designer?
Confidence. I think you need confidence. You need to really believe in what you're doing, but you also need to do that with intent. So I think it's just being very intentional and proactive. That's one way. Those are like soft skills. Another soft skill is being open to feedback and asking for feedback, really going out of your way and asking people to play your stuff and try your stuff. Because and this goes like for arts as well. You'll have something that's very subjective, but as for levels, there are right ways and there are wrong ways to do things, and there are things that result. There are certain things you can do that result in outcomes that you might not have wanted or you do want, and being very clear about that as you're going. You need the technical skills. The technical skills is actually just learning how to use the editor, understanding what white box is. You don't necessarily have to be able to sculpt or do any kind of 3D engineering or anything like that, but definitely being able to use the tools and being able to understand how to manipulate them to convey a message. So even the simple thing of angling blocks towards the landmark or towards objective, understanding metrics, these are all things that are like really things that you can learn as you go. The harder stuff to learn is the personality stuff, I think, and the harder to kind of be very open to criticism, open to feedback, and willingness to learn and show that. Because passion can only get you so far. I think something that's really helped me has been discipline. You have to be disciplined, both disciplined with your time, disciplined with yourself and where you're going to put the time you have. Because, for example, these days I don't really make levels so much, but what I've started doing is going through levels. Something with my current manager has suggested is just going through levels and just drawing them out. If you want to, reconstructing them in an engine, but just understanding why certain levels have been made the way they are and spending time. So you can talk about that. You have to be able to talk. As a designer, the designer part means you're going to have to speak about your ideas and be able to communicate them. But I think the clear thing is just being very open and intentional, and have a good understanding of, or clear idea of what it is you're trying to make, and who it's for as well. Who is this level for? You can't make something super complicated in a casual game without at least giving the players that training that they can understand how to use a tool. So, for example, at King, we had to retroactively fit in tutorials and have that in a way that players could, wherever they logged in, they could get a chance to play with something that they hadn't yet reached. So we would give them a tutorial, let them interact with it, and then say, this is where it would appear. You still have to progress to get to there. Or if they'd missed it and we introduced it, or we shifted the levels of saga around, that's what we call it, the list of levels or the fold of levels, we called it a saga. We make sure that players could get that content regardless of where they had already, if they had progressed past it, if that makes sense. And getting your team, when you've got a producer who still says, I need content made, we need to hit these metrics, being able to kind of back that up with evidence, and you have to have some understanding. That's why it's really good to be able to talk to different people in the disciplines, so you can have that communication, and so you can have that backing when you need it. And that requires you to be confident, because if you don't believe in yourself, no one else is going to believe in you. I tell you that. Tell you that now. people are busy, so it's really important to have that self-confidence and go with it.
Nice. Yeah, and I've always said that, like, nice. Yeah, I've always said that, like, even as a game designer, the number one key skill is like communication. Because if you can't communicate with your team, you can't communicate like the mechanics or the level design or how something should overall aesthetically look to the player or stuff like that. So yeah, I completely agree with what you said, really.
I said a lot. So yeah, I guess in conclusion, I think you can separate into soft skills and technical skills. The technical skills will come with time. You just basically need to be able to show you can use an editor, that you know roughly where things work. EA had a very different editor to Sharkmob. We use Unreal here, and other companies use different things. So you need to be able to. That's pretty transferable. But the soft skills and being able to take what people have said, translate that into what needs to happen, is something that can be developed as well, and in anything. So it's easily transferable.
Nice. And yeah, you mentioned Unreal there and a few programs previously. So what programs do you recommend for aspiring level designers to use, both free ones and paid ones?
So Blender, I know it's weird I just brought up a 3D modeling kit, but Blender is really, really useful. That's free because some studios will use modeling software. So Santa Monica, for example, or 343, the guys who made Halo, the later Halo games, they make things in Maya, so 3D software, where a company like DICE has its own engine, Frostbite, which is very similar to Unreal. So Unreal is a really good free one. Blender is a really good free modeling software. Unity as well. A few companies use Unity. I have barely used it. Apart from when I was at university, I used it more then, but now getting into industry, I've been using more Unreal. There's a funny conversation about this actually with a character artist at the studio. We were talking about the exact same thing. But I think Unreal is useful as more studios I found will be using that or something like it. And then, yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Like Unreal has a lot of like free stuff that you can download from the eShop and play around with. But also, I definitely recommend, if you've got a game, it helps me. If you've got a game you really enjoy, see if it's got a level editor and make levels for that. Make levels for that game. And then you can, because if you've been playing it, you'll understand how the level works. You understand how the mechanics of the game work and what players will need, particularly in multiplayer games. You can then go and building with intent because you know the desired effects you want to have. It's much more difficult to build a level if you haven't got a game to base it off or made, if that makes sense. You haven't got locomotion in the game. You don't know what combat is. You don't know all these other aspects coming. Which is why when I look at people's portfolios, I see a lot of just fly-throughs of this environment, which I wouldn't really say is level design. It's much more environment art. They're not really designing there's no narrative, there's no flow. And that's a really important thing in understanding flow. And I can talk about this for hours, but I think, Unreal, really good. And Blender are the two I'd recommend. And then if you can, you can go on to things like Maya, our 3ds Max, but definitely Blender is a free one. It's really useful.
Nice. Yeah, and to be fair, like even though I'm not a professional 3D artist or anything like that, I'm still dabbling into Blender, and those are and 3D modeling is like the skill that I practice away from the games industry. Just because it's fun to just be like, like Blender 101 is like doing the donut, but then
really?
Yeah. But yeah, then after that I've like dabbled in a little bit of character design and like a little bit of prop art. So it was always good to I would recommend using Blender. It's very user friendly.
Awesome. Yeah, I need some characters I need to make, Warhammer characters I need to make, so I need to get on making my own stuff. So Blender, 3D modeling is definitely important.
Exactly. But yeah, those are all the questions that I had for you today, Josh. But
Cool.
feel free to come back onto the podcast anytime and talk about more of talk more on level design.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank
But
you
yeah,
for having me.
thank you so much for being a part of the podcast. It was a wonderful time talking to you. But yeah, that concludes another episode of the Game Dev London podcast. I've been your host, Nichola, and you can find me at Humphreys Media on pretty much most social platforms. But yeah, big thank you to Joshua for being my guest today. So where can people find you on the World Wide Web, Joshua?
Oh, so LinkedIn, Joshua K.A. Mallet, it's my middle names. And so I'm always available on there. And on Instagram, you can find me at Omegon Edge. It's an odd name, I know. It's my nerdy account for all my Warhammer stuff, but I'm quite happy to get in contact. I have a Twitter, but I don't really use it. It's called Edge Omegon. So I probably should start using that more, to be honest. But yeah, feel free to just ping me. Feel free to ping me on Instagram. That's where I'm on most of the time. So yeah.
Nice. And yeah, if you want to continue the discussion about level design, or you found any of these topics interesting, also head over to the Game Dev London Discord. We can all discuss it there. It's a wonderful place to be as well. Little shout out. But yeah, then fantastic, and this was a great recording session. Thanks to everyone who tuned in, and yeah, be sure to check out the Game Dev London on all platforms for all the latest updates. Otherwise, yeah, we'll see you next week. Bye, everyone.
Ciao.